From a world building standpoint, Carnival Row was one of the more interesting shows that I've seen in the last decade in terms of fantasy shows that have like an original take on things. So many shows that come out, we have your traditional sort of elves, dwarves, halflings, and sort of fall into that generic fantasy trope environment. And that's not to say they're bad shows. There can be very good storytelling that happens within the boundaries of that limitation. But I really like things that push the boundaries and give us new ways of looking at things and new storytelling. And I was very, very sad to hear that the second season of Carnival Row is also going to be its final season. The teaser trailer doesn't show a lot, but it gives us a glimpse into what's coming. There's a description here at Nerdist, which we'll read through in a few minutes, which kind of gives us a synopsis of what's going to be happening in season two. Um, I think that we're going to get because we knew going into it that this was going to be the end, they're going to give us a conclusion to the story. It would have been great to have seen this go beyond just two seasons. 3 or 4 would have been even better. But as long as they give us a good conclusion, it's okay if it's only two. But before we get into season two, I kind of want to talk more about Carnival Row and one of the reasons that I think it was such a good show. And I want to dive back into season one a little bit and talk about some of the storytelling components that made it so interesting for me. If you're new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon if you like this video. And at the end, we'll talk about other ways you can hang out and support and continue to be part of our community. But in the meantime, I'll jump over to the wiki here because it kind of has a basic description here. It is what's considered a neo-noir fantasy series. Was created based on an unproduced spec script called A Killing on Carnival Row. And in this show, mythical beings must survive as oppressed refugees in human society as a detective works to solve murders. Now, it's been a few years since it aired. It aired all the way back in 2019. So it has been a hot minute or two. 2021, 22. It's been it's not even premiering until next year. So it's been 3.5 years basically until it's back on the air. And I would imagine because of the fact that the people starring in it are big film stars. But also the pandemic happened in between there and now, and who knows what happened. But we are only going to get two seasons of it, unfortunately. In any case, the premise of the show is mythical creatures who have fled their war-torn homeland and gathered in the city as tensions are simmering between citizens and the growing immigration population. There's an investigation into a string of unsolved murders going on, questions of madness of power, unresolved love, and social adjustments eating away at whatever uneasy peace exists. Now, not only did it have Orlando Bloom and Carla Delevingne, it also had a slew of other actors, but I would love Jared Harris was here as well. He's the Chancellor of the Republic of the Burj. Great job as always, his performance. But we have a slew of additional races that are shown beyond just the dwarves and elves that are kind of standard in most other shows. We had kobolds, um, in this show. We also had fawns. Um, we also had the Horospuks, which are witches. There's wolfmen, along with Cara Delevingne's character, who is a fae, and she has wings. And there's lots of different fantasy races being portrayed here, which was one of the reasons that made it so interesting to me. Now I know some people have said they didn't like the show because it was too slow, whatever the case would be. That's fine. Art is subjective. I loved this show. My wife really enjoyed this show. It was a fun story of sort of a detective, which was kind of like the core principle here is Orlando Bloom's character as this detective who is trying to solve a series of murders. And his backstory is that he's a half fae passing as a human. And he's also a veteran of the war before. And as a result, he sympathizes with the fae, which disgusts many of his colleagues because they are very much against the fae. And that's a theme that we're playing with in our own world of the Weave and the Void, is the sense that we have the fae, which are the elves and the dwarves and the halflings and the brownies, um, so on and so forth. And then we have the humans who came from the south. And the humans, in our world, the humans were the refugees 500 years ago. And then over time, they've become to outpopulate the Fae because they breed more quickly. And there is resentment against the Fae for their immortality, and they feel like they're fenced in because of the rules that the Fae have imposed upon them, and the fact that the Fae have natural magic, and the church or the humans in our world are related to technology. So I've played around with those own themes because I think it's interesting to have sort of racism being told from a different perspective. It's not about skin color in fantasy worlds like this. It can be about actual racial differences because on planet Earth, we're all the same race. We just deal with prejudices that are programmed into us by, individuals who teach us as we are growing up. Whereas it's very different when you're dealing with a fantastical world where the racial differences are very real in the sense that the humans aren't the same as the Fae, who aren't the same as the Fauns, who aren't the same as the Wolfmen, who aren't the same as the et cetera, the Kobolds, et cetera, so the Goblins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So from a storytelling perspective, I love the fact that we're dealing with all these complex races and the tensions that go along with that because this is after a war and we have all these refugees coming into this city, and it's a human city, and they're having to take in all these fate and magical, mythical refugees, and it has caused some major racism issues. And I love the fact that we get to see that portrayed in the various characters as it plays out over the first season. There's obviously some romance in here as well, but I think just overall it was great at setting up a city um, at the peak of heightened tensions, and there's murders going on and all this other stuff. Well, that was the first season. At the end, I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't watched the first season, but the second season coming. Here's a synopsis here over at Nerdist where it says, in a fantasy world where humans and creatures clash, season 2 of Carnival Row picks up with former Inspector Rycroft Philostrate, aka Philo, investigating a series of gruesome murders, stoking social tension. Vignette Stone Moss and the Black Raven plot payback for an unjust oppression inflicted by the Burgess' human leaders. Jonah Breakspear and Sophie Loggerbane, along with Okay, that's just the human leaders. Okay. That says Tourmaline inherits supernatural powers that threaten her fate and the future of the Row, and after escaping the Burge and her vengeful brother Ezra, Imoen and her partners Argus encounter a radical new society which upends their plans. With humans and Fae folk divided and freedom on the line, each hero will face impossible dilemmas and soul-defining tests that test them in their epic conclusion to Carnival Row. Mm, I can't wait. This is also another example of a show by Amazon Prime, which brings me back to the point I've tried to make many times to people of Rings of Power, is that Amazon Prime produces a ton of great television. I love most of what Amazon Prime produces, which is I will not, you'll never hear me out there pooping on Amazon because I like most of what Amazon produces. I have had concerns about Wheel of Time and Rings of Power. That's fine, but then they have original shows like this, which in my mind portray great storytelling, great script writing, and just genuinely fun fantasy told in a different way. Where we've got neo noir detective work happening in a fantasy world. I love it. And then we bring some real world politics into it with refugees and immigration and racism and all this other stuff. I think it's fascinating, which for one of the reasons that I found it such a good show. And Chris enjoyed it as well because she likes anything fantasy as a general rule. I don't know. Love to hear your thoughts on Carnival Row. Drop them down below. And if you've gotten to the end here, hopefully I've earned your subscription. Hopefully I've also earned your support because I do stay on the air and get to do this full time thanks to all of these amazing people who support the channel. So don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so that you can continue to get updates in the future. And of course, don't forget to drop us super thanks on these videos on a one-off. You can also do the membership options down there. There's 3 different tiers. You can also join in on a live stream and do super chats that way, or you can head over to the Patreon page and support via Patreon if you want to get into our fantasy world, read our book, play our tabletop, check out our point and click game, and all the other stuff. In the meantime, thanks for listening, everybody, and I can't wait to watch this when it comes on the air in February, so stick around because I'll be reviewing it when it's up. Until next time, everybody, have fun.